China is the most populous nation on Earth, with around 1.4 billion people, of which there are almost 55 major recognized ethnic groups that exist in the country as symbolized on the historic Five Races flag. However, in modern China, it is much a question of whether all of these groups are treated equally, and whether in China one can have an ethnic identity outside of being Chinese. This is especially the case for a group of people from the province of Xinjiang in modern-day China, which is in the very west of the country, a people that are called the Uighur. These are a people who have frequently been in conflict with the Chinese government and their attempts to stamp out their own identity in favor of making them what they see as fully Chinese. However, to fully understand what's happening in present-day Xinjiang, we have to go back even further.
In the 1750s, Xinjiang's conquest by the Qing dynasty marked the first time in 1,000 years that a Chinese-based dynasty took full control of the region. Immediately after its conquest, the Qing initiated the Dzungar genocide against the Dzungar people. One of the many consequences of this was that it solidified the Uyghurs' demographic dominance in the region. Nonetheless, Qing authority in the area was consistently under threat. This is best exemplified by the Dungan Revolt from 1862 to 1877, from which a short-lived independent Muslim state also cropped up under the name of Kashgaria. But for more on Uyghur history leading up to the modern period, check out my video which tracks their history all the way back to the 6th century.
As my friend Tariq from Hikma History explained, the Qing dynasty were able to take over in Xinjiang and then carried out a genocide against the people that had lived there before, thus greatly depopulating the region, making the Uighur the biggest group that remained. In 1884, the region was officially named Xinjiang, which actually means the new frontier, as this region had before been at the frontier of the Qing Empire and would actually remain the frontier of the Qing Empire and the Chinese states that would follow it. This almost became like the Qing Empire's version of Australia for the British. It's where they sent many convicts and criminals from further east in China to live out there, as well as doing a reverse with some of the peoples at the borders of their empires, like the Mongols and the Kazakhs and other groups like the Uighur. They would often export them back further into mainland China. This led to some tension between these new Han migrants into the area and the people that had lived there before, although many of the Muslims also moved into this region following the downfall of the Dzungar Khanate. The people we now call the Uighur used to live only in one part of Xinjiang, the large province that it is today in the Tarim Basin, but after the Qing conquest they spread out and moved over all parts of the present-day province. And at the time they in fact did not call themselves Uighur yet, but instead named themselves after the various oases on which they lived. While there had been tension between the Qing and many of the Uighur people, things really came to a head in 1912 when the Qing Empire was taken over and was replaced with a new Chinese Republic following a lengthy period of civil war. This led to a rise in Uighur nationalism in the region as well, as Uighur people wanted to move away from being ruled by Chinese people to the east. This Uighur nationalism was strongly related to religion, and on several occasions Uyghurs attacked both Christian missionaries, Buddhist murals and Hindu traders when they practiced their religion in public in Uighur areas. This led to a period in which there were Uyghurs who both supported the new Chinese Republic and who were against it, as Uyghur society had traditionally fallen along clan lines. These clans chose whether they supported the new government or not, and then carried on fighting between one another on the edge of the Chinese state. Those who were against the Chinese often found support from neighboring Soviet Union. As the Soviet Union wanted to expand its influence in the area, they armed the militias of several ethnic minorities in the area, including the Uyghurs, And in 1934, they succeeded in establishing the first East Turkestan Republic, as East Turkestan is the name that is given to this region by the Ughur themselves, and indeed by many activist groups today, as the Ughur are a Turkic people and they are in the east of the region where Turkic peoples live. This Republic of East Turkestan would claim its base to be around the Tarim Basin, as well as parts of the areas where the Uyghurs lived in only a small part of what is today Xinjiang. However, this would only be short-lived, as soon the Uyghur came under attack from the government in mainland China, and they were actually suppressed by one of the warlords who was himself also a Muslim, but not an Uyghur Muslim, as there are also other Muslim peoples living in China of the Hui group. And this is very interesting because the Soviet Union would try to play these different groups off against one another across the border in order to spread its political goals. And in this way, they often supported the Uyghur and were successful in doing so 10 years later in 1944, when they were able to establish, with a slightly different flag as you'll see, the Second East Turkestan Republic. This was partially due to the fact that the Republic of China at the time was embroiled in conflict with the Japanese as part of the Second Sino-Japanese War. And as such, it was a good time for those in the very west of the country to take advantage and declare their independence once again. Before going any further, I'd like to quickly mention today's video sponsor, which is Magellan TV. Magellan TV is a paid-for video streaming service with thousands of different documentaries that you can gain access to with a small monthly fee. They cover many different topics like science, nature, and history. I'd like to recommend one in particular today, which is called World War II, China's Forgotten War, which is about the Second World War in China. It's an interesting topic because some people see it as being a separate entity to what was going on in the West at the time, as of course the war in China had already started much earlier in the Second Sino-Japanese War. So it's a really great watch, and you can have access to this and many other documentaries on similar topics by going to Magellan TV. There's even a special offer for viewers of this channel. You can either go to the description or simply type try.magellantv.com/historywithhilbert for a free month of premium membership. It's really worth checking out, so do check it out because that does help out the channel as well, and you can get access to all these great documentaries. But anyway, let's dive into it. Before the Japanese had invaded the Republic of China, the Republic had itself been fighting off against the rising power of the communists within China itself. However, during the war, they signed a truce so that they could both work together to fight against the Japanese. But of course, in 1945, with the surrender of Japan, the two went back to fighting one another again. The communists would win the war in 1949, at which point they turned their attention to the Second East Turkestan Republic, which had been independent since 1944, and which of course had previously been a part of the Republic of China. In an incident that was clearly manufactured, several of the leaders that were invited over to Beijing went into the Soviet Union and died in a mysterious plane crash, which was probably a result of Soviet and Chinese communist collusion in order to reinstate communist power over the area. While the Chinese Communist Party would later claim that the Republic had been a people's revolution and had voluntarily embraced incorporation into the People's Republic of China, really, it was just a communist takeover of the area that had been independent, and they were too weak to fight back. When the first census was taken in 1955, it seemed that around 73% of the population of Xinjiang were Uyghurs at the time, while around 6% were Han Chinese, lots of whom had been brought into the area under the Qing, and which had been brought as well under the Republican period in order to maintain some control in the form of garrison outposts. However, the Chinese Communist Party would crack down on much that made the Uyghur region unique, as this is something that can't exist in a communist state. And so they cracked down on the Uyghur language and especially on religious freedoms, as these were a threat to the unity of the people and the people's revolution, especially under the dictatorship of Mao. As part of these policies, there was an enforced Sinicization process in which many Han people from eastern China were sent over into Xinjiang in order to culturally assimilate the Uyghur, and what many have described as being a replacement of the native people there in order to bring it more under the sway of the regime in Beijing. This has often led to ethnic tension between those that are native to the region, such as the Ughur, as well as, of course, many other groups such as Mongols and Kazakhs, etc., and the Han immigrants who have come from a different place and who have the protection of the police and the state. The Soviets always used to back these smaller ethnic groups, particularly following the Sino-Soviet split, as a means of establishing a third column within China and stoking unrest there, as they had done in the 30s and 40s against the Republic of China. The Soviets armed several different militia and separatist movements consisting of Uyghurs that took up arms against the Chinese. There was a frequent exchange of propaganda by both the Chinese and the Soviets in the region, with the Soviets promising the Uyghurs much more freedom if they became a Soviet republic, such as Kazakhstan and others around them were, while the Chinese promised that the Soviets would not at all respect their religion and their way of life. In 1962, however, around 60,000 people from the area of Xinjiang fled into the Kazakh Soviet Republic as a result of the famine that had been caused by Mao. And in 1979, with the start of the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, it became a very important strategic region for both the Soviet Union and China, as it shares a small but significant border with Afghanistan as well as with several other republics in the region. And China actually used this as a point of contact with the Mujahideen, which they funded to fight against the Soviets. Meanwhile, the Soviets were hoping that they could use the Uighur as a third column with which to destabilize the Chinese, and wanted also to ensure that they didn't back the Mujahideen against them in Afghanistan. At the same time, the Chinese used as propaganda the supposed atrocities that had been committed by Soviet troops in Afghanistan as a warning of what life would be like under the Soviet Union. However, in 1991, with the collapse of the Soviet Union, the nationalism and separatism within the Uyghur community expanded greatly, and this is in large part due to the fact that many of the neighboring groups, such as the Tajiks and the Uzbeks, as well as the Kazakhs and the Kyrgyz, all got their own independent nations, and so the Uighur were hoping that they too would be able to form a separate nation of East Turkestan and escape religious and cultural persecution under the Chinese state. However, the Chinese crackdown on any mention of cultural and physical political independence for the Uyghur people remained as strong as it had ever been. And this also saw the emergence of new terrorist, often Islamic and jihadist organizations, such as the East Turkestan Islamic Party, which has carried out around 200 terror attacks, mostly in the region of Xinjiang, but also in other parts of China and in a few other countries, against civilians in order to bring awareness for what's going on and to use violence to attain their political ends. And they also have clear links to other jihadist movements and indeed to Al-Qaeda and some of the other terror networks in the area. The increase in terror attacks by groups like this actually brought the Chinese to bring in many more police into the area, as well as military garrisons, and to step up their efforts in order to destroy the Ughur culture, as they see this as the solution to stopping the terror attacks that have been occurring. Furthermore, the Chinese have destroyed almost 5,000 of many of them very old ancient mosques in the region, and arrested and interned pretty much every imam in the area as well, in order to stop the religion being practiced. An open practice of the religion is indeed deemed illegal, as are Islamic marriages. Things really stepped up in 2013 and 2014, when around 70 people were killed by various movements based from Uyghur separatists and jihadists, and especially under the administration of Xi Jinping, it's become the case that there has been an insane amount of surveillance in the province of Xinjiang, with revolutionary facial recognition technology being used to track the movements of the Uyghur people and to keep an eye on their whereabouts at all times by the Chinese state. Indeed, even all Uyghur people have to download a particular app on their phone that tracks their conversations and who they are in contact with, as well as almost around 1 million people having what are called guests living in their home who are essentially Chinese people that spy on the family in which they've been embedded with and report back to the local police to ensure that no religious practices or other illegal cultural activities have taken place at that time. By far the most concerning of the situation in Xinjiang at the moment are the internment camps. These are basically large concentration-style camps in which Uyghur people have been interred. The number is somewhat of a mystery, but it seems that there are at least around 1 million people, with some estimates putting around 3 million people that are currently being interred in such camps. And if one takes the lower estimate of these figures, that's around 1 in 10 of all Uyghur people that have been interred into one of these camps, which the Chinese state claim are for re-education, although many of those who have survived these camps report widespread, horrific and systemic abuse against the people there, who are drugged, beaten, sometimes killed and sterilized against their will in order to break the cultural practices of their ancestral people of the Uighur, as well as to bring them into the fold as loyal citizens of the Chinese state by any means necessary. Turkey has long time been one of the only advocates for the Uyghur people, and there are around 50,000 Uyghur refugees in Turkey that have escaped from Xinjiang, some of them from these internment camps and the pressure of the Chinese, although the relationship between Turkey and China with the Belt and Road Initiative, to name just one, is putting this in jeopardy, as Turkey appears to be moving more in China's direction, and with other richer Arab countries like Saudi Arabia mentioning that the internment camps are a good idea, that these re-education camps are a good solution, as well as some of the other bordering countries like Kazakhstan not speaking out against China for these actions. I thought it was important to make such a video to make people aware of what's going on in Xinjiang with the Uighur people, as well as looking into this very interesting history with my friend Hikma. And that's why I wanted to donate the proceeds of this video to a charity that's going to be helping Uyghur people that have got away from this terrible situation. So you watching this video, you liking, you commenting, sharing it around with your friends, and if you personally want to donate as well, that would really be great, because it would help people that are in this terrible situation at the minute. And it's just a small thing that I think we here on YouTube can do to help out those who are less fortunate than ourselves and who are really going through what I would call a cultural genocide. And as someone who frequently makes videos about different cultures and the importance of keeping tradition and minority languages and things like this alive, it felt like this was a worthwhile thing to make a video about, and also to raise some money for, so that we can make even some small change in this case. As I said, we haven't yet decided on which charity to give to, because we want to take some time to make sure that we're giving it to a good charity that's doing some good work on the ground there. But if you have any suggestions, if you know of anything or are involved yourself, please let us know in the comments below, and we would be very grateful to check that out. And I'm also very grateful for you sticking around and watching this video. I think it's a really interesting topic. There's a lot more to be said, so if you want an in-depth video on the very recent history, like I did a few months ago, I was doing some more recent history events that were happening, I'd be very happy to look into that, because this one has covered quite a lot of history, because there is an awful lot to get through with the Uighur and their past and the various republics that they had, and then them being incorporated into the Qing Empire before that still, and their relationship with the Soviet Union and with the Chinese, and how the Chinese see them as a kind of third column, and why this doesn't really work in a communist system, because everyone has to be on the same level playing field, which means that you cannot have things like religious organizations and cultural identities that shift away from that of the one-party state, which I think is a large part of what we're seeing there. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this video. Do let me know in the comments below, and give me a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. I've been Hilbert, and this has been The History.